So, what if I told you that the secret to a fairer, smarter, and maybe even a safer world was this ancient, almost forgotten rule? Well, according to the thinker Nassim Nicholas Taleb, it is. He calls it skin in the game. And it's this incredibly powerful idea, but once you see it, reveals all these hidden imbalances of power and risk that are just everywhere in our modern lives.
And this quote, man, it just cuts right to the heart of the problem he's talking about. It points out this really dangerous thing that's happening in the modern world. We have this growing class of decision makers who are completely insulated, walled off from the results of their own decisions, whether they're good or bad. And that separation, that lack of feedback, is a huge, huge problem. Okay, let's look at a real-world example where this isn't just some abstract theory. It's an absolute tragedy. Taleb points to these pundits and policymakers, he calls them the interventionistas, who argued for regime change in Libya back in 2011. Now, from the comfort of their air-conditioned offices, they made their case on TV and in newspapers. But what was the result on the ground? Well, it was chaos, a failed state, and, unbelievably, the reemergence of actual slave markets. But for the architects of this policy, there was no price to pay. No lost jobs, no ruined reputations, certainly no personal danger. They were completely shielded from the catastrophe they helped create. So why does this keep happening? Well, Taleb says it's because decision makers who have zero real stakes in the outcome, they suffer from these critical flaws in their thinking. It's kind of like a doctor prescribing a really potent drug for a patient they've never even met based only on a single number from a lab report. They can't see the complex, dynamic system of the actual human body. And without that direct feedback, without seeing if the patient gets better or worse, they never ever learn from their mistakes. So, what's the antidote to this dangerous disconnect? Well, it's what Taleb calls skin in the game. But what does that really, really mean? Okay, and here's the key distinction. This isn't just about getting a bonus if you succeed. That's only the upside. True skin in the game is all about symmetry. It means if you stand to gain from the rewards, you absolutely must be exposed to the risks. You have to pay a real penalty when things go wrong. It's about sharing in the harm, not just hoarding all the benefits. This whole idea of being connected to reality is captured perfectly in the Greek myth of Antaeus. He was this giant who was basically unbeatable as long as his feet were touching the ground because he was drawing strength from his mother, the earth. The only way Hercules could defeat him was by literally lifting him into the air, severing that connection. Well, skin in the game is that contact with the earth. It's the friction and the feedback from the real world that grants true strength and knowledge. This just says it all, doesn't it? Talk is cheap. Opinions, they cost absolutely nothing. What truly matters is what people are willing to bet on. An opinion that's backed by a real-world position, a portfolio, carries infinitely more weight than one that's just, hot air. Now, you might be thinking this is some modern business school idea, but Taleb shows us it's actually one of the oldest rules for building a just and stable society. I mean, we can trace this principle of symmetry back thousands of years. From ancient Babylon to the maritime laws of Rhodes, societies just understood that for a system to be fair, risk had to be shared. It's only in our super complex modern world that we've perfected the art of separating actions from consequences. And that leads to what Taleb calls the Bob Rubin trade, a really clever way to transfer all the risk onto others while you keep all the rewards. Hammurabi's code was, well, brutally simple and incredibly effective. There was no corporate veil to hide behind, no complicated legal jargon. The builder had literal skin in the game. He was powerfully incentivized to use the absolute best materials and techniques because his own life was on the line. This prevents the transfer of those hidden asymmetric risks, the kind a professional knows all about, but a client doesn't. So fast forward to today. In modern finance, we see a much more sophisticated and disastrous violation of this ancient rule. Taleb names it after Robert Rubin, who was a former U.S. Treasury Secretary and a top executive at Citibank. And it's a pretty simple four-step playbook for privatizing gains and socializing losses. Step 1. A banker takes on these complex, hidden risks that pay off really well for a while. Step 2. They collect huge bonuses. But step 3, when the inevitable blow-up happens, the taxpayer is left holding the bag. And step 4, the banker gets to walk away, blame it all on unforeseeable market chaos, and keep every single penny of their past bonuses. And the scale of this asymmetry is it's incredible. We're talking about over $120 million in compensation all while the system he helped manage was piling up risks that brought it to the very brink of collapse. It is the perfect real-world example of heads, I win, tails, you lose. That right there is the definition of having no skin in the game. Now, this principle of asymmetry doesn't just apply to finance. It leads to one of the most surprising and powerful rules of social dynamics, what Taleb calls the minority rule. It explains how a small, really determined group can end up dictating outcomes for absolutely everyone else. Okay, to get our heads around this, let's start with a simple puzzle from the supermarket. Have you ever noticed that little symbol on your soda can, that U inside a circle? That means it's kosher. But why? The population that strictly keeps kosher is less than 0.5% of the US total. So here's the paradox, right? How can such a tiny, tiny minority impose its dietary preference on the entire market, on 100% of consumers?
Well, the answer lies in this fascinating dynamic that Taleb calls the minority rule. And what it reveals is that in any complex system, it's not the average preference that wins out. It's the most inflexible one.
The key is a really simple asymmetry. A person who keeps kosher has a hard, non-negotiable rule: they will never consume a non-kosher product, period. But a person who doesn't keep kosher, they have no rule against consuming one that is kosher. They are flexible. So for a producer, it's just way easier and cheaper to make everything kosher than to manage two separate supply chains. The entire system just bends to the will of the least flexible person. So once you really understand skin in the game and these hidden asymmetries, you get this powerful new lens for looking at the world, and you can't unsee it. It becomes a universal detector for bullshit. It's a simple, practical filter that helps you separate the people who are just talking from the people who are actually doing. It distinguishes those elegant theories from what actually works in the messy real world. And this lays out the core distinctions perfectly. Are you dealing with real hard-won expertise or just a charlatan? Is someone truly committed, or are they just signaling virtue for social points? Is their knowledge concrete, or is it purely abstract? Skin in the game is the razor that separates them. And as Taleb argues, this is the great danger of our time. We have entire professions filled with people who are brilliant at explaining why their models failed, but who never, ever pay a price for that failure. But here's the thing. Reality doesn't care about explanations. Systems don't learn when people apologize for their mistakes. They learn when the people who make the catastrophic mistakes are removed from the system. Survival, not storytelling, is what really matters. And this leaves us with a final provocative thought. I want you to apply this lens to your own world. In your workplace, in your government, in the media you consume. Who is just talking and who is truly exposed to the consequences of their words and actions? The answer tells you everything you need to know about who you trust.